All right, let's turn our Bibles to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. We've been studying about the first murder in the Bible. The book of Genesis means beginnings. And so as we look at the book of Genesis, we see the first of a lot of things. We saw the first murder and the first recorded death, which is Abel. And we see it says that Cain, in verse 16, went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And the word Nod means wandering. It means wandering. And so he dwelt in the land of wandering, the land of barrenness, and it was on the east of Eden, which is interesting because that's where the cherubim was placed as well, blocking the way to the Garden of Eden, or the east of Eden, which is the gate of Eden there. Well, verse 17, in spite of him being a wanderer, a vagabond, a man living under the curse of God, he still found a wife. And maybe he was married to her, before he killed Abel. I don't know. But he found a wife. And it does seem like that sometimes young ladies have a attraction to these wild men, these kind of cowboy type, bravado, just kind of rebellious sort of characters. And I don't know what attracted Cain to his wife, but we see here in verse number 17, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And the big question that people ask is, where did Cain get his wife? Because it's assumed that the only people on the earth at this time were Adam and Eve, and then we mentioned Abel, and we mentioned Cain. Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. Chapter 5, verse number 4 says, in the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And so there were other people on the earth at this time, sons and daughters that Adam had. Adam lived to be, how old did he live to be? He lived to be 800 years old. After he had begotten Seth, he lived 800, so 930 years old before he died. And so if that was, let's just say that was related to our 93 years today, that means he probably had about 200 years where he could have children, him and Eve. And so over a 200-year period, let's say they had 100 or 120 kids, he had lots of sons and daughters. And this thing populates pretty fast, doesn't it, on the earth? And so at this point, the law had not been given by Moses or from God by Moses, in which marrying your sister was forbidden. And so at this point, the women who were available was his sister. And we see even in Abraham's life, he married his half-sister, which was Sarai. And so people say, well, how is that? That's gross, that's awful. In today's culture, it is gross, it is awful, and according to the law of God, it is immoral, it is sinful, and you do not do this. You do not marry your close of kin. Some people suggest that at this point, the genetic pool, so to speak, wasn't as corrupt as it is today, and so that it would not have the same genetic consequences to marry your sister or your brother as it would today. But like I said, in the law of Moses, it is clearly forbidden. But at this point, that is the only answer that we can have to this question, and there be two parents of the human race, and that is Adam and Eve. And if Adam is not the only man alive, then the whole theology of the Bible breaks apart at that point. So where did Cain get his wife? Adam and Eve bore many other children, including girls. Therefore, he married his sister. Now let's look at Leviticus chapter 18. Leviticus chapter 18, and we'll see where under the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, where God does outlaw this practice of marrying your sister, along with a lot of other close of kin. Verse number 6 says, "None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord." Uncover their nakedness is a euphemism for committing the marital act with somebody, for marrying someone or having a marital relationship with someone. "The nakedness of thy father or the nakedness of thy mother shalt thou not uncover. She is thy mother, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover, it is thy father's nakedness. The nakedness of thy sister, the daughter of thy father or daughter of thy mother, whether she be born at home or born abroad, even their nakedness shalt thou not uncover. The nakedness of thy son's daughter or of thy daughter's daughter, even their nakedness shalt thou not uncover, for theirs is thine own nakedness. The nakedness of thy father's wife's daughter, begotten of thy father, she is thy sister, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's sister, she is thy father's near kinswoman. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, for she is thy mother's near kinswoman. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's brother. Thou shalt not approach to his wife, she is thine aunt. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy daughter-in-law, she is thy son's wife. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy brother's wife, it is thy brother's nakedness. And so we see here clearly laying out that the practice of marrying one's sibling is outlawed at this point in the law of Moses, along with those who are near of kin. So that's where Cain got his wife. Any questions or thoughts about that? It amazes me that a culture which accepts so many perversions seems to be disgusted at the idea that Cain would have married his sister at this point in human history. It amazes me. But that's just the way the world is. You know, we all have a tendency toward hypocrisy, and the world, the unsaved world, is no different. Okay, well, let's go back to our text in Genesis chapter 4. It says, "And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord." Verse 17. "Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch." The first city was built by the second generation of humans. Understand that. The first city was built by the second generation of humans. And so I guess it would be the third generation, wouldn't it? Well, I guess Cain's the one who built the city, so it would be the second generation. And so this idea that people were walking around like wild savages until after millions of years they finally civilized themselves and built cities, that is a lie of evolutionists and a lie of the devil. Cain built a city. I remember someone mentioning this to me once and said that anybody who was a caveman, and there were people who dwelt in the caves, but anyone who's a caveman left civilization in order to become a caveman, because we see human beings as God created them were civilized beings. And Cain built a city, it says here. And so that's just something to think about. You know, people leave civilization and go to be uncivilized. It's not the other way around. We did not evolve. Instead, we devolve. And I think in some ways we see our society today devolving into godless whatever. But anyway, so what was he trying to do? In verse 12, it says, "You're going to be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth." And so Cain says, "No, I'm not." And so he tries to thwart God's curse upon him by building a city. He also thought to build up the name of his family, and he pursued securities, pleasures, and wealth that this world could give him. And he named the city after who? Who did he name it after? His son. That's right. My family is going to be the greatest family in the earth. And so I have a place of security, a place of pleasure, a place of wealth, and that is my city named Enoch. Enoch. Okay. There's a warning given. Look at Psalm 49. Psalm 49 in the Bible. A warning is given. Psalm 49. And we see here, I think, the mind of Cain in these verses. Beginning of verse number 11. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Nevertheless, man being in honor abideth not. He is like the beasts, the animals that perish. This their way is their folly, yet their posterity approve their sayings. Selah. What does that mean? What that means is, it's very clear. You know, my mom and dad have died. My grandparents have died. Maybe some of you have all of those living. Your great-grandparents then, some if not all of them, have died. Who are you to think that you're going to live on this earth forever when everybody who has come before you has died? One day, you and I are going to die. And instead of living for ourselves, we need to live solely for the glory of God. And so I think this describes Cain here. I'm going to name my city after my son Enoch. And our kingdom, our glory is going to continue on forever and ever upon this earth. Is there a city of Enoch still in this world today? What happened to it? And all the other cities that were built by Cain and his descendants. What happened to them? Know your Bible? What happens in Genesis? Great flood came, destroyed them all. But anyway, let's continue on. Psalm 49, verse 13. This their way, verse 14. Like sheep, they are laid in the grave. Death shall feed on them, and the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning. And their beauty shall consume in the grave from their dwelling. But God, this is the godly, will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. Selah. Be not thou afraid when one is made rich, when the glory of his house is increased. For when he dieth, he shall carry nothing away. His glory shall not descend after him. Though while he lived, he blessed his soul, and men will praise thee when thou doest well to thyself. He shall go to the generation of his fathers. They shall never see light. Man that is in honor and understandeth not is just like the beasts that perish. Just throw them in the grave. You know, a sheep dies, what do? Dig a hole, bury it. Maybe you would use the illustration of a dog or a cat. You just dig a hole and you bury it. And that's exactly what happens to the wicked. And their memories are gone forever. And they face the judgment of God. So here's a warning from Psalm 49 for those who think they're going to beat the system, God's system, and they're going to be great, and their families are going to be great in this earth, and their names are going to continue on forever and ever. All right, any thoughts about that or questions? Well, civilization is born. My kids like Sid Meier's, is that his name? They like his computer game, Civilization. And we're going to see civilization being born beginning in verse 18. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. Now we can assume that these are probably his firstborn sons here. They're not all of his kids that he had. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. So here's the first sign of civilization. A man taking 2 wives. Now listen. Is this the way it was meant to be? No. No, Adam and Eve, 1 man and 1 woman for life. So Lamech, more the merrier, right? He takes him 2 wives. We'll see how that works out later on in this chapter. Verse 20. And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents and of such as have cattle. In that computer game that they like, that would be animal husbandry. Okay, so he's a rancher. He's raising cattle, probably raising goats and sheep and things like that. He's a rancher. Verse 21. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. And so we see in verse 21, music, jubilee, right? Jubilee. He's the one that came up with the musical instruments. And everybody's just like a jazz club. All of them are just dancing, having a big time to all this music. They're eating steaks and lamb chops and all that. No, I guess they're not. Interesting. Was there eating of meat before the flood? Interesting. Maybe they raised cattle just for the milk and stuff like that, but they weren't eating steaks. Okay, so take that back. Okay. All right, but they were having a good time. And verse 22, and Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And so we see here that they had bronze and they had iron. And this was all before the flood. So civilization in full force. The raising of animals. We see music and we see brass and iron. Civilization is here. And whose descendants are on the cutting edge? Whose descendants are the leaders of societal evolution, so to speak? Whose descendants are these? Cain's. They wholeheartedly pursued the things of this world. That's what Cain's descendants did. Well, I told you there's a problem here. Verse 23 and 24. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. And so we see here, the note here from Schofield, where it says, I have slain a man to my wounding. It could be translated, a man who wounded me. And so the note here in Schofield says, Cain had slain an unoffending man and yet was protected by Jehovah. How much more Lamech, who had slain in self-defense. And so Lamech, it seems like may have been an angry man, someone who would cause people to be angry with him. He had these 2 wives, and someone threatened Lamech, and Lamech killed this person who threatened him. And so we see here the glory of humanity, and that is, we see here Cain's descendants. Now there is a note here from Schofield. It says, the first civilization, that which perished in the judgment of the flood, was Cainitic in origin, character, and destiny. Every element of material civilization is mentioned in verses 16 through 22. City and pastoral life, and the development of arts and manufactures. Enoch, after whom the first city was named, means teacher. The El termination of the names of Enoch's son and grandson shows that for a time the knowledge of Elohim was preserved, but this soon disappears. Ada means pleasure or adornment, Zillah, to hide, Lamech, conqueror or wild man. So, the Canaanic civilization may have been as splendid as that of Greece or Rome, but the divine judgment is according to the moral state, not the material. I like that phrase there. The judgment of God is according to the moral state, not the material. You can have what seems to be a happening civilization and lots of prosperity and lots of ease, and yet still face the judgment of God. Matthew 16:26, Jesus says this, "What is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" All these great people, guess what? As far as we know, they all died. And today they're separated from God in a place called hell. But man, he's the one that came up with musical instruments. Man, he came up with animal husbandry. He came up with using brass and iron. Well, what good does it do you if you reject the God who gave you these talents and gave you this prosperity? What good did it do you? And the answer is zero, none. Pursue the things of this world, but do not make that your main pursuit, okay? It's okay to make a living. It's okay to be the best in your field. But listen, if you leave God out of it, what does it amount to? Nothing. That's what we're learning on Wednesday night in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's vanity. It's nothingness if everything we live for is under the sun on this earth and not for the glory of God. Well, thankfully, Cain wasn't the only child that they had. Verse 25, the only boy. "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." Seth. The word Seth means appointed, which is what it says. He's appointed me another seed instead of Abel. What was he appointed to? He was appointed to carry out the godly line through which the promised Messiah would come. Genesis 3:15. What does it say? "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman," speaking to Satan, "between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." The seed of Satan, Cain, had killed the seed of the woman, Abel. But is God defeated? Never. And so he raised up a new seed, a new person through whom the Messiah would come, and that is Seth, the one who means appointed. Eve at this point realized that Cain wasn't the treasured possession she thought he was, and Abel was dead. Remember? That's what Cain means, treasured possession. No, that's exactly the opposite of what he was. So we go back to our text, verse 40, Genesis 4:26. "And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord." Enos, you know what that word means? If you had a study Bible, it might have a note. It means mortal, frail, weak. You know, what if I name one of my children Weakness? I name my daughter Mortality, you know. I name my child Frailty. You know, Eden, frailty. You know, she seems the opposite of that actually. But anyway, but frailty, you know. What is Seth trying to do with naming his child Enos. Well, I think perhaps what Seth is trying to do, he saw what happened when they named the child treasured possession, right? And so now he's trying to keep his son humble by reminding him that life on earth is mortal. We're going to die. It is frail. It is weak. It's a reminder of his coming death and judgment apart from the grace of God and the deliverer who has been promised to Adam and Eve. And it says in verse 26 something I think is very significant. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Another way that some people would word this phrase is, then began men to call themselves by the name of the Lord. True believers began to distinguish themselves in the world. Genesis chapter 6, verse 2 tells us the title that they went by, and that is the sons of God. The sons of God. And Cain's descendants were known as the children of men. You see, there's a dichotomy that's forming here in this world. The New Testament would say the kingdom of God and the kingdom of men. You see, there's a dichotomy between God's people and between the world's people. And at this point, people began to gather together and identify themselves by the name of the Lord. Now, God had not revealed himself as Jehovah yet, but they were saying that this God, this Elohim, this Almighty God, is our God, and we will live for him. This is likely when Jehovah's people began to gather together as a called-out assembly. Some of you ever heard that phrase before, called-out assembly? It's another word for church in the Greek. In order to worship, sacrifice, and receive religious instruction. And so, the struggle is now on. The teams are now made between the seed of the woman, which is Seth and his descendants, and the seed of the serpent, which is Cain and his descendants. Which one is going to be victorious? Verse number 1 of chapter 5 says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Whenever you see a phrase like, this is the book of the generations, it is like another chapter in the book of Genesis. And so we're beginning here a new section of the book. We see this phrase in Genesis chapter number 2, verse 4. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created. And so we see here in the first chapter of Genesis, the first part, we see the creation of the world. Then we see the creation of man. And now we see the line of Seth, which is the line through which the Messiah is going to come. And one other thing, and then we'll quit, says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Now, I had never noticed this until I read A.W. Pink on this. Never thought about this. But look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. I'll leave you with this bit of knowledge here. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 begins this way. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ. We see in chapter 5, verse 1, the book of the generations of Adam. We see contrasted the first Adam, which is Adam in Genesis, with the second Adam, which is the Lord Jesus Christ. The opening of the Old Testament, we see the book of the generations of Adam. The opening of the New Testament, the book of the generations of Jesus Christ. We see Adam as the head of the human race. We see Jesus as the head of the heavenly race. We see that those who are in Adam die, and those who are in Jesus live. Let me tell you something, folks, and I'd never seen it before until I was studying for this lesson. This is one of the greatest contrasts of the Bible. Genesis 5, verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. And Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Jesus Christ. And we see here the sons of God, the children of men, Cain and Seth, Adam versus Christ. Let the conflict, let the battle begin. And next time, we'll move on from there.